Sharon, it's all yours.
Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here again this morning. We were talking about the beautiful spring teas we had yesterday, and it's not the same today out there. Hopefully you all got out and enjoyed that for a minute. Our agenda today is pretty short and sweet and direct. We're going to continue what the presentation that Matthew had started last month, which was really great information. Matthew, do you want to read the stay home order before we get started?
Yes, I can do that. So, due to the Safer at Home order issued by Governor Cooper, members of the Bicycle Pedestrian Active Mobility Advisory Committee are participating virtually. All members will vote by roll call. A member will be recognized, at which time the member will state his or her vote.
Great, thank you. First item on the agenda is the diversity and inclusion training. Is anyone having trouble getting that done? Any questions on that? Okay.
There were a few people that had yet to submit that, so I will follow up with them personally about that and make sure we get those completed.
Yeah, if you did not see, I was a little confused on that myself, but there's a form that needs to be submitted back to Matthew showing that you completed that and the date that you did that. So if you don't have that in your email, Matthew can send that back to you again. Thanks, Matthew. And then minutes from the last meeting, any additions to those, corrections to those, questions on those? Do we have a motion to approve?
I make the motion.
John, thanks. Second?
Greg.
Greg, thank you.
All right. Then we need to do the roll call vote, so I'll go through
Okay.
the roster here.
Go ahead.
Keith, how do you vote?
Approve.
Greg, you seconded. John, you made the motion. Michael, how do you vote?
Approve.
Sharon?
Approve.
And Cindy? I think you said approved, right?
Sorry. Approved.
That's all right. Thank you. Okay. Unanimous.
Kelly. Okay, great. Thank you all. And then Matthew, we'll just let you dive in. We're going to do the second half again of his presentation that we started last month. And then after that, we'll have some time for discussion. If you've had time to review the city bicycle master plan, we'll talk about that and try to start setting some priorities for our team. All right. Thanks.
Good.
I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to share my screen here. Everybody see my screen now? What exactly do you see? Do you see just the safe routes to school, or do you see anything else?
Safe routes to school.
Okay. So just a recap. So last week, we started this presentation just to bring everybody up to speed on the efforts of especially Winston-Salem DOT and our MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, as it relates to biking and walking and micromobility. And traditionally, we've broken these topics into a few different categories, and we call them the 5 E's. So engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation. And so we have efforts in all of those categories in order to improve biking and walking in the community. And so I've kind of provided a review of some of that, and the engineering, the infrastructure side of that is really pretty comprehensive. There's a lot to that, and we really didn't get past that part of the discussion, which is fine because there is a lot to that. We talked about the infrastructure side, a lot of walking infrastructure projects and efforts going on right now. Sidewalks, intersection improvements, And then bicycle lanes and on-street bike infrastructure improvements. So we discussed that. Greenway improvements. So some of the current greenway projects that are in process right now. Specifically Little Creek, Salem Creek Greenway extension. And then we talked about the planning side of things as well. So Kelly and I work in the planning division of the Winston-Salem Department of Transportation and the MPO. So there are a lot of planning efforts that we are either required to do or asked to do because they're important to the transportation system. So here was a listing of some of those efforts. Some of them, like the Comprehensive Transportation Plan and the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, are items that we work on as kind of MPO staff. And some of the other efforts, like the Bicycle Master Plan, Pedestrian Master Plan, Long Branch Trail, feasibility studies, those are things that we work on as staff for City DOT. So that's about where we left off, and we had a pretty good discussion, I think, after that presentation about infrastructure and things that I didn't even mention in the presentation about maintenance issues. So it was a very good discussion, and I wanted to pick up where we left off last week with some of the kind of what you might call the programming side of things, everything that's not infrastructure related. So, the education, the encouragement, the evaluation aspects of the work that we do. And feel free to chime in as we go through this. I'm happy to answer questions. I think we had a great discussion last time because of the questions that came up during the presentation. So I wanted to start with the encouragement aspect, and specifically the Safe Routes to School program, because it includes biking and walking efforts. The Safe Routes to School program goes back quite a few years now, and probably about 10 years ago we had a grant, Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure grant from NCDOT, and it was $50,000, and we used that funding to purchase a bike trailer and a fleet of bikes and develop a curriculum. And over the course of a couple of years, we worked with the school district, and we actually, when working with them, they created they added to their curriculum a component to their curriculum that included the bike and pedestrian education. So that is now officially a part of their physical education, their PE curriculum. And so the teachers, the PE teachers in the district, they have the option of borrowing those bikes and the trailer and actually conducting bike safety skills with the students in the class. So just as they would, say teach volleyball or baseball or golf or whatever it is, bike education and bike safety skills are part of that curriculum now. So we've been running that program, especially in coordination with the National Cycling Center over the last few years, and the Safe Kids Coalition and Winston-Salem Police Department, to provide that bike education. And the program has evolved, and in part because of the partners that we have. So with the help from Safe Kids Coalition and the Cycling Center, we've added to that program. Specifically, we've added a helmet fitting component, helmet distribution. So after students go through this bike education campaign, they've gone through the safety training. The Safe Kids Coalition and the National Cycling Center would actually come into the school and conduct some additional safety training, and then do helmet fittings with the kids and actually give those students helmets at the end of the program. So, over the years, the program has developed as we've added more partners to it. And it's really successful now. Michael, I know you're obviously instrumental in that. I don't know if you have anything to add or to comment on, or if I left anything out on the existing Safe Routes to School program.
No, I think everything that you've mentioned is, what we have going on. Lily might get you for not saying properly fitted bike helmets. But,
That's right.
But yeah, that's actually been really, really good. I mean, we give away over 1,000 helmets each year, which means that we're impacting over 1,000 kids in the elementary school, and then that's on the elementary level. And then the National Cycling Center is also we conduct a bike program for the high school level as well, and very similar 2 trailers full of bikes on rotation from school to school and operated through the PE section. So yeah, it's yeah, there's a lot of great components with the education, and I think with the new grant coming in and Alta, I think it's, especially for the pedestrian side of things, it's going to be, I mean, everything's going to be boosted up, but the pedestrian side of things is definitely going to be enhanced.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I'll talk a little bit about what Michael just mentioned with Alta planning and design. But that was really the city and the National Cycling Center involvement in safe routes to school. In addition to that effort, though, the individual schools could conduct bike and walk to school day activities, and we would try to support that as best we could. But with as many schools as there was only so much time to support those schools. So those schools were kind of on their own in setting up those kinds of activities. So it really relied on the interest from administration and teachers and parents at those schools to conduct those kinds of bike and walk to school day activities. So those were sporadic and really depended on the interest level at the individual schools. Michael mentioned the grant that we have. So NCDOT had issued a call for applications for additional non-infrastructure safe routes to school funding. And we applied, and we received a $250,000 grant to cover 3 years of safe routes to school activities. So that's a huge boost. I mean, I mentioned that $50,000 was the original grant, and you can see what kind of activities and what kind of benefit we've had from just that $50,000. So to add 250 to that is going to allow us to do a lot more than what we've done to this point. And one thing, Mike, I don't know if this is correct, but I think the numbers that I had seen for that, the bike training to date was at least 6,000 students had gone through that program. And I don't know if you had anything more recent than that, but since the inception, we've reached that many students with that program. So
is that your overall number? I think those numbers are grossly underestimated. If you're saying since the start of the program?
Yeah, so that was, we had kept track of how many classes we had met, how many teachers we had met with and the number of students in those classes. So that may be an underestimate, but at least that many students we've reached through the bike education program.
I would say probably double that over the life of the program for sure.
Hey, Matt?
Yes.
How do you prioritize, which schools you're going to? I was just kind of curious.
Well, it kind of comes back to the interest. So we always rely on the interest of the teachers who are conducting the training. So one of the early breakthroughs we had was we had completely relied on the interest of teachers to actually attend the training. So we would actually train, and Michael does this now, train the PE teachers in how to conduct the bike safety skills course. And that was an optional thing at the beginning of our Safe Routes to School program. And then we started working more closely with the PE coordinator for the school district, and she actually mandated it for the PE teachers. So all of them attended the training. And so at that point, I think there was just much more awareness of the program and the availability of the bikes. And all of the teachers were then trained in how to conduct the safety training. And at that point, then we received many more requests. So it's still, it's based on the requests of the teachers. They have to have some interest in actually pursuing the program. So I think, Michael, the way we've done it in the past is, we get that list of requests from the teachers. And then I think, if there are schools that haven't participated in the past, we'll start with them and then kind of just fill out the roster for the year. But the trailer's typically at a school for 3 to 4 weeks. So there are only so many schools that the trailer can actually visit in a year, but it is based on the interest of the teachers who are conducting it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I will add that so the desire in the elementary school level is been growing rapidly. So what the previous coordinator did is she limited them to sign up every other year. Because you'd get the same teachers that were really gung-ho and just would try to sign up. And too, the time of year when you sign up. I mean, obviously, if you're signing up in January, February, it could be pretty cold outside. So people try to jump on the warm months. So yeah, I think that was just an option to, to say, hey, instead of signing up every year, sign up every other year to give people a chance. And they typically have, like, she would have that schedule. She would coordinate that schedule with all the teachers and get the schedule printed out. And then we would take it from there and then coordinate all the bike safety presentations and everything. And I imagine that's what our plan is for the, it's kind of a wash for the 2021 school year. Even though the kids are back, I've had discussions, and we're going to just wait and probably engage during the summer with summer programs, and then just pick that same schedule up that was created for the school year for next year. That's probably the plan.
Thank you, Mike.
I know you say elementary school. Is there a certain grade that you prefer doing the program with?
So when I got involved, we were doing 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And I think the previous coordinator, she was kind of more, she started kind of veering away from the 3rd graders just to get 4th and 5th. And I think that was mainly because in her thoughts that every other year would be like, okay, well, at least all the kids, if they do it every other year, then they'll get a chance, versus two times to do it. My take was always with the PE teachers, like, if you can manage 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, I think that it's acceptable. But, I didn't want to go against what she was saying. But, it didn't really matter to me. But yeah, the bikes are designed for that size of age group, So.
And I'll say at the state and the federal level, the Safe Routes to School programs and the funding that's available is targeted towards K through 8. For those grade levels. So the grant that we have now, the $250,000 grant, we're working, we went through a competitive bid process and we've selected Alta Planning and Design to manage that program. And so we're working with them right now on the negotiations and contracts to get them started. And what the goal with the $250,000 grant now is really to provide a package of materials that schools can use. So I had mentioned that, we were really dependent on schools and the interest at each individual school to have walk to school day events or bike to school day events or any kind of Safe Routes to School promotion. And one of the things that we want to do with this grant now is create a package of materials that we can provide to every school and educate them about Safe Routes to School and the value and the resources that are available, and give them that baseline of knowledge about the program. And then they'll have the information they need to actually make a decision about whether they have the resources and they have the interest to be involved with Safe Routes to School. And that's a big step, because previously what we would try to do is reach out to those schools and maybe the principals, and it was really there wasn't a real coordinated effort. It was difficult to get the attention of the principals, and it was we were really dependent on their interest, and it wasn't a real a coordinated effort. What we're going to be able to do now with this grant is actually have a systematic approach of how we interact with all of the schools. Of course, it's still their decision as to what extent they want to be involved, but once they make that decision, we'll have additional materials. That's what we'll develop through this grant. We'll develop those materials and the instructions on how to conduct walk to school day events and bike to school and walking school bus programs, the encouragement materials, the education materials. We'll be able to tailor a program for each individual school that expresses an interest. So we'll have much greater reach into the school district and in all of the schools. And it's a 3-year program. So that's really important with Safe Routes to School because it takes time to develop these programs in the school. You can't, it's really difficult for a school to just pick it up and run with it and go and have it completed within a year. So, we have to work pretty far in advance. We'll start reaching out to the schools this spring for the fall semester and get them engaged early. And because they have so much going on over the summer, adding another component like Safe Routes to School, we really, if they're interested, we need to reach out to them early and get that program set up early. So and that's what this grant will allow us to do, is to have a more coordinated effort that gets to the schools early and reduces the burden on them as much as possible. Because they don't have funding to do Safe Routes to School, so we need to make it as easy as possible for them to conduct these kinds of programs and activities.
Matthew, quick question. What's the impact goal of this program, and how do you measure apart from participation? That's a good question. And so with Safe Routes to School, there's a lot of evaluation that goes on. So one of the things we did with the original grant that we had was assess, the current status of biking and walking to schools, and work with the school district on getting those statistics on how many students bus, how many walk, how many bike, how many are driven. And then, we can, after the interventions, with the Safe Routes to School interventions, we can go back and perform those evaluations again and see if there has been any impact. Part of it is, for some schools, I should say, part of this is just getting students active. Some schools, biking and walking to school really isn't an option because of their location. So there are even efforts of, bike and walk at school, or remote drop off, where students may not walk from their homes, may walk from, a nearby shopping center or church or whatever the nearby land use is. So anything to encourage that activity and getting students thinking about biking and walking, and families thinking about those options, and encouraging that physical activity. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about Safe Routes to School or this grant specifically? Okay. So education is another component, and a lot of these, there is overlap. So, Safe Routes to School is, I package that as an encouragement program, but there are education components of that as well, and evaluation components of that. So there's not really a clear-cut line as to what's encouragement and what's education. There is a lot of overlap. But one example of what we've done in the past is this Watch for Me NC program. So this is another program from NCDOT, and we were a partner in this in 2019. And it's kind of set us up to continue education and encouragement efforts like this. And so we're proposing to do some additional education and encouragement components for 2021 as well. And but the Watch for Me program is a good kind of foundation from which we can pursue those kinds of education efforts. So you can see these are materials that NCDOT has created that they make available to communities throughout the state. So really some simple messages, but some things that we need to really make people aware of. I think a lot of these messages may be lost on a lot of drivers and even some cyclists and pedestrians probably. So whatever we can do to spread these messages. So you can see we've tried a number of different media types. So billboards, you can see that bike we actually had, it's called Bike My Ad, and somebody will pull that billboard essentially throughout the community. And so we use that particularly downtown, where there were a lot of people out, a lot of people walking, and that was a very visible thing in that environment. We have done a lot of social media outreach, whether it's using Watch for Me NC materials or materials that the city marketing and communications department created. Even printed materials and whatever we can do to get those messages out. And we've worked with, all of our partner agencies, again, the National Cycling Center and Safe Kids Coalition, the Winston-Salem Police Department, the school district. They're all members of this coalition to help spread these education messages. And we've even worked with outside law enforcement agencies, say like I know the School of the Arts, their campus police department, they were interested in having these materials, they have some locations on campus where, students are crossing streets. And so we're trying to draw attention to those locations, and they have an interest in that. So it's participating in Watch for Me really kind of expanded the coalition that we have and allowed us to get these messages out to a wider group of people. So again, we're going to try to establish a budget for education programs this year and use some of these materials that we've used in the past from Watch for Me, and then use some of our own materials as well. But this is an ongoing effort. This is something that it never really goes away. It's something that has to be constant. And, the Watch for Me program was really focused on kind of the time frame from August through November or December. And with good reason, because that's when students are returning to school. So there are more people potentially, especially kids walking and biking. But also as the daylight recedes, we have, less daylight and more interactions on the streets during the nighttime hours, as people are leaving work and leaving school or going to school in the morning. So that was kind of their target. But, what we want to do is expand that and have year-round education efforts, because there are needs at all times of year. In the spring, as people start to get out and bike and walk more, we certainly want to target that time as well.
This to me is just a key issue, and one of the biggest differences I see, especially if you travel to other places where it's just widely known that if you have a foot in the crosswalk, cars will stop. And here, it's almost the reverse. I had a friend the other day talking about the new crosswalk between Grayland and Reynolda Village, and her comment was, "I don't know why they put that there. Someone's going to get killed." And the irony of that is that's exactly why that was there, so someone doesn't again. I'm looking at these banners. I'd love to just put this on my own personal Facebook page that yield to people in crosswalks. It's the law as my, banner. If we can have these graphics and share them, that would be awesome. But anyway, side note there.
And I think that's one of the roles for this group is how can we spread these messages and brainstorm and work together on coming up with the ideas, but then also executing that and getting these messages out there as much as we can. So I think that's, Sharon, for the future agendas for us to have this discussion about, what approach we want to take and, where should we try to advertise and how should we try to do that. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So we get into evaluation then. So one of the things we want to do is measure what kind of impact we're actually having. So as we build more infrastructure, as we're putting in more sidewalks and more trails, and then as we're as we're checking these or kind of pursuing these education efforts, are those having an impact? So there's a number of different ways we can evaluate that, and I've kind of focused on one of those methods, but there are others as well. So we are a part of NCDOT's bicycle and pedestrian pilot counting program, and we have been since 2014. And NCDOT has always collected count data for motor vehicles, and it's a really extensive program, and it's really a great resource. You can look at interactive maps online, and for many, many roadways, they have counts and historical counts and current counts, but they have not had that same level of information for biking and walking. So in 2014, they started this program with the idea of creating that type of resource for biking and walking data. So it is a pilot project. We have 4 locations that we worked with them to identify and install equipment. So Salem Lake, the Strollway, 4th Street downtown, and West End Boulevard. And we worked with them. So this is a pilot project on their part. So, if there were some locations that we thought would potentially be better than some of these, but there were criteria that they were trying to meet, essentially. So they wanted a variety of different locations. So they wanted trails, they wanted business districts and sidewalks, and they wanted a variety of different locations because it is part of their pilot project to figure out how to create this program statewide. So these have been good locations, but there are so many other locations I would love to measure as well. But they did provide this equipment at no cost to the city originally. We're responsible for maintaining the data or the equipment now, but it was a resource that we may not have had access to. We may not have been able to purchase this equipment on our own without the assistance from them and without the financial assistance from NCDOT. So I mentioned that assistance. In addition to the equipment, they've provided technical help. So they have staff that actually come and visit and help us set these counters up and troubleshoot if we have issues. So we've been counting data at these locations since, in some cases 2014. Some of the other sites are a little bit newer. But I wanted to just touch on the trends in 2020 a little bit. It's certainly been a huge change, obviously, this year in how people are commuting and how they're staying active. But I thought the example that I show there, 4th Street and Salem Lake, that was pretty illustrative of what's been going on. So the counts on 4th Street, we would typically see about 1.3 million walking trips on 4th Street. The counters in the right near Mellow Mushroom, actually. And so we would see 1.3 million or so walking trips per year. And in 2020, that was down about 58%, which, logically that makes sense as, people are working from home. There aren't as many trips downtown for commuting or, lunch trips. So that was down. But at Salem Lake and West End Boulevard, those locations were up 50% or more. And, again, logically it makes sense because people were looking for activities, and biking and walking on the trails was one of those activities that really saw a boost this year. So, business trips, commuting trips down, but the recreational trips at Salem Lake were way up. So one question I posed there, and again, this is, we can have some discussion after the presentation or for future meetings. We have this information available. How can we use it? What can we use it for? It certainly is useful to demonstrate that people are using the trails. We're seeing Salem Lake, at the peak, it was at least 1,000 biking and walking trips per day. So, that's valuable information to show that the investment that's being made is actually, it's having an impact, and people are using the infrastructure that we build with that funding. But what else can we use it for, and what other purposes are there for it? And so, perhaps after the presentation, we can have that conversation. But I think we're open to using this however we can. If we're going to maintain the equipment and go through the trouble, then, it only makes sense to use it and make use of that data. Any questions about the counting program? The photo there is at Salem Lake, and you can see it's a little bit blurry, but that post is, there's an infrared sensor in that actually detects the direction of travel. And then that equipment, that red and green equipment, is actually buried in the ground. There's a battery there. There's kind of the computer that controls the whole counting system. And then there's a transmitter. So the data is actually transmitted through the cellular network, and we can access that data remotely. And then there are loops underneath the trail surface that detect metal from bicycles as the bikes go over. So the counting program is one way we evaluate, but then we also do a lot of crash analysis as well. And I don't have any specific information about this, but the crash analysis we perform, it helps us determine where to invest the funding that we have for infrastructure. And as part of the pedestrian plan process that's going on right now, the consultant did a crash analysis, and that is directly it's leading directly to recommendations on where we should invest in infrastructure. So that's another type of evaluation that we can perform, is that crash analysis, and use that information to help us make investments. So here's for the count data, a trend line. You can see right around March of 2020, that's the green line, is 2020. You can see how that deviated from the 2018 and 2019 data. And these trend lines, they make sense. You can see, the winter, the numbers were a little bit lower and then peaked in the summer months. And you can see with 2020 how that drop off from February through April, and then it started to rise a little bit, and but it kind of leveled off. So, and then Salem Lake, we had some issues with this counter, so it was offline for a while. But again, that green line is 2020, and you can see the bottom there, the weeks of the year. So right around, must have been July or so, we had that counter got back online, and you can see compared to 2018, just how much higher, averaging, that week about 1,300 users, and throughout the year that line has remained above previous year count data. So moving on to, really it's another evaluation tool, but the walk and bike friendly community designations. So we have applied for both of these. One from the League of American Bicyclists, the bike friendly community designation, and we're a bronze level community in their program. And then the walk friendly community designation, that's actually through the Highway Safety Research Center at UNC. And we did not receive any designation from them. But part of the value of these programs is that, you get some feedback on where you as a community need to improve. And they look at, all of these programs. So part of the reason we approach the biking and walking programs with those 5 E's, the engineering, education, encouragement, evaluation, enforcement, is that these designations and these organizations that perform these evaluations, those are the types of criteria that they're looking at. And, really in order to have a really well-rounded program that's really supportive of biking and walking, you need to have elements in all of those categories. And, bike-friendly community, that's the one that I'm most familiar with because we've done it a few times now. But, I mean, it's a significant application. It's dozens of pages of questions about our infrastructure, the funding that we allocate towards that infrastructure, our maintenance, all of the other E's. They ask a lot of questions about, how we operate for these modes of transportation. And in the end, what you receive back is some fairly helpful feedback on where you need to improve as a community to rise to that next level. So it's another form of evaluation, kind of an outside evaluation, impartial. We submit the information, and then they help us determine where we need to prioritize investments and time. So one thing I wanted to note was that we are about due for our reapplication for bicycle-friendly community designation in 2021, actually. So I think that would probably be a good activity for us, potentially as a committee, to pursue, to work on that together, and go through that application and actually complete the application together.
Hey, Matt?
Yes.
So I know we've had the bronze for a number of years, I think.
Yeah.
So the last time you applied, they probably told us, what we need to do to get to, I think what the next one is, silver. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So can you tell us what kinds of things we needed to do to get to that next level?
So miles of infrastructure was one thing for sure. So on-street bike infrastructure and trails, they definitely emphasized that. I know one of the recommendations was creating a committee like this. So we have made progress on some of that. So we have added more infrastructure, and we've obviously created the committee. Now, off the top of my head, I can't think of too many of the other things, but it's really the that infrastructure, and then the policies that support that. So what does our development ordinance look like? Does it support biking? Those types of things, and maybe for one of our future meetings, we could review a previous application and go through that. But I know infrastructure was one of the major recommendations that they had for us, is that we just needed more on-street bike infrastructure.
Sure. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions about these programs? Okay. So the micromobility aspect. So our committee is bike, pedestrian, and micromobility. And so I wanted to touch on a little bit of the history of the micromobility program here in the community. And so we go back with Bike Share back to 2017, and thanks to the National Cycling Center, we had a docked Bike Share program from Zagster for 3 years. And so in May of 2017, just before the Cycling Classic, the program kicked off, and it ran until just about May of last year, of 2020. And I know at that point, Zagster actually went out of business. I think the pandemic and just made it really difficult for them to operate as a business anymore. But I know the Cycling Center has been working on relaunching that program. And Michael, I don't know if you have any details that you want to share, or if there's anything you want to say about the Bike Share program, but that has been such a valuable component to the biking program here in general, and just making bikes available to people who may not have them, and just raising that awareness and that visibility of biking in the community.
So we got a memo from Zagster probably around April or so, or more of a notice saying they've gone out of business and that you make all claims to their trustee. So we kind of was caught flat-footed. They were sending a message saying, "Hey, we're coming to reclaim all the assets, all the bikes, all the stations." So the Cycling Center made a quick decision to purchase all the assets in our system, which at the time was about 50 bikes and 10 stations or 12 stations. And we decided to also kind of double down, and we purchased another 50 bikes and 10 stations. We've been working since probably July on getting this relaunched. With new sponsors and new kind of encroachment agreements for new stations, new other stations at some other parks. And we're getting really close. We've got probably with this month or next month, you'll see the bikes back out on the street. But yeah, it's been a pretty lengthy process, a lot bigger undertaking than I originally anticipated. But yeah, we're really excited to get them back out and make it happen. So yeah, we're looking for all the support we can get with that. So if anybody has any thoughts, ideas, how to, anything, just get with me, and I welcome any feedback in any direction.
Yeah, so it has been a really valuable program. I know stations out at Salem Lake, for example, hundreds and hundreds of rides provided at locations like that for people who may not have access to a bike. And I should backtrack for a moment. Micromobility really refers to those shared biking and scooter options. So that they've become obviously really prevalent around the country, but it's really enabled by smartphone technology, and allows people to use one of these transportation options without the inconvenience of having to own it and figure out how to maintain it and move it around. So they really do provide a good transportation option for people who may need to make short trips, or for recreation options. So there's a lot of value there. So that's really the experience we've had with bike share. But the scooters were a whole nother story. So about a year and a half after the bike share program launched, the electric scooters arrived in Winston-Salem, and that was actually Bird in August of 2018. And they arrived unannounced. So one day the scooters just appeared on the streets without any coordination with the city, and they operated for about 3 months, and there were quite a few complaints that had come in about the locations of scooters and ridership. And at that point, the city council asked us to, they had asked Bird to cease their operations, and asked staff to devise a micromobility ordinance so that we could kind of manage these programs a little bit better than what they were under Bird. So we worked with the city attorney and created an ordinance that managed, how people, not only how people would ride these devices, but also how the operators could, deploy them and essentially set up a business running these types of programs. So in the end, what we came up with was a permit process that requires anybody who wants to operate a dockless micromobility program to get a permit from the city through a competitive process. And so each year we accept applications from companies and then set up an evaluation panel and award permits to usually 2 companies. That's what we've done the first couple of years, is to 2 companies to operate the electric scooter business in Winston-Salem. So, we have operator agreements. There are device fees that they have to pay, and then we coordinate with them. So they operate the business, and the city, we're there to make sure that they're operating within the requirements of the ordinance. And we use some online tools. There are mapping tools that allow us to track where the scooters are. So each of those scooters is GPS enabled, so we can see at any moment where scooters are deployed. And in the end, what we can get from the companies is ridership data. So it's anonymized, so we don't know who is riding where, but we can see generally where scooter riders are making their trips. And we can use that then in planning. So we know, we have a better idea of, where popular areas are to ride. We can see how people are using the scooters to get to different destinations. And then we can use that in planning, where additional deployment sites need to be, or maybe where we need to make roadway improvements to support the safe travel. But it's been interesting to be able to track that, the ridership, and then some of the most popular areas to ride. So far we've had very good coordination. That the companies are very responsive to requests that we have, and have been actually really good to work with. And what I'm curious to see, because of the pandemic, both of the operators that we had last year ceased their operations in about April. So we really haven't had a full spring, summer, fall season when we would expect high ridership. So I'm curious to see this year in 21, as we get into spring, summer, and fall, just how much the scooters are used, because to date we've had really a couple fall seasons when we've seen ridership, but we haven't had a true summer season for scooter riders yet. And obviously the number of riders and the rides will increase dramatically during those months. So we're kind of anticipating that this year, and interested to see how the data shakes out. So that was all that I had. I know we took up a lot of time here, but it looks like we have about 10 minutes for discussion. Sharon, I'll turn it over to you. That's the the rest of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Matthew. I will open it up for any of you to make comments or questions from this, thoughts that are bubbling around.
Matthew, there were a couple different, I think the NCDOT pilot counting program for bikes and pedestrians, and then the scooter ridership, where you have access to data for those. Are those publicly accessible, or are they just available to you in the city?
Well, I think that was one of the questions I raised, was how can we use it, and making that publicly available would be one of those ways. And so I think we can have some discussion, about, how can we package that data so it's actually useful for people, so they can see that information. And so right now it's not really, it's not, there's nothing preventing us from sharing it publicly, but I think what we need to do is come up with the best way to do that in a meaningful way that actually contributes something. So I think that's part of the discussion I would like to have from this group is how can we share that data and make it useful?
Got it. Yeah, I was just curious. I think I know we have a plan to discuss priority projects and stuff. Understanding what some of that currently looks like would definitely be helpful to inform some of that.
Yeah, and the bike and pedestrian counter data is somewhat limited because we only have those 4 locations. What would be really beneficial, one of the things we've discussed with NCDOT, is them adding portable counters to their system so that we could actually rent essentially a counter for a period of time and have it and measure at different locations throughout the city so that we could get a better picture of where the activity is happening. And there are some other tools out there. I know like Strava data is available, and Keith, we talked about that. The Strava data, that's, there are heat maps available from Strava online, so you can see kind of where some of that activity is happening. But there are limitations to that Strava data, and it would be great if we could have some portable counters so that we could share more data, more meaningful data across the entire city.
Can I go back to with the bike-friendly, walk-friendly community designations? And I was just curious, are there some similar communities in terms of population size, maybe geographic location, that we could benchmark against as models to know what does gold actually look like? It's funny, anecdotally, I was on a ride on Sunday and a lady kind of pulled up and rolled her window down and said, "Be careful out there. This is not a very bike-friendly community." And I giggled, and she went on to tell me she was from Tucson, Arizona, which is maybe one of the most stressful bike rides I've ever been on. And it just made me think, like, what are we trying to look like? Is there a model that we can be following? Do you have several cities in mind or towns?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at that list and see communities, that have scored really well in our, platinum level communities. And I think it's useful to compare, those communities and not only what they're doing in terms of, how much, bike infrastructure they have or what kind of programs they have, but also the community characteristics. And I think that's a useful comparison. So we could look at, the highest level communities, say, Portland and Minneapolis and Madison and Davis, California, and do a comparison there. But we can also look at, kind of our similar communities. So, Greensboro and Durham and other North Carolina communities to see, how they have scored and where they're succeeding and where they need improvement as well. So there's a couple different ways we can approach that, and each has its value. And we could even bring in, for this committee, I moved here from Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm, I know the bike and pedestrian coordinator there. So we could even, I'm sure she would be willing to talk to us, and we could coordinate with, the similar people in Greensboro and Durham and hear about what they're doing as well, if there's any interest in that. But yeah, Keith, I think we could do any number of different comparisons with the communities that are on those lists.
We used to live in Los Angeles before we moved here, and they had a program or an event that started small and it just kept growing called Ciclovia. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Sure. And
they closed down various streets depending on what part of the city is hosting it, per se. So one example of one we went on was downtown LA, and it went through, where all the museums are, and then into Koreatown and kind of up towards Hollywood. And the whole city gets involved, and they close down the streets, and then the vendors are out there, and they have food trucks, and they do like the bike safety with the helmets in an area for children. And it's a big community event to bring people all together. And you can walk it, you can bike it, you can be on your scooter, but it's, to get people up and moving and have the community all involved.
Sure. So Ciclovia is definitely something that we were aware of. And actually it was the inspiration for us. We had our own Open Streets event in Winston-Salem for 9 years, I think, from 2009 or 2010 until 2019 or so. And obviously it was a smaller version of that compared to Los Angeles. But we would close down a mile or two of streets. We started downtown, we moved into the Innovation Quarter, and then our final few years, we actually coordinated with the Cycling Classic and had our event in conjunction with the races. So it was the same model. So we actually closed down some streets, and we invited vendors to come out, and we had food trucks and bike helmet fittings and distributions and all the safety messages and everything. So it was a very similar event, just on a smaller scale. And so we did that for nearly a decade. And just, I think 2019 was the last year we did it. And one thing I'll say is that it's a huge resource, huge use of resources to plan an event like that. So, I feel like we gave it a good effort for nearly a decade. And it just, if you spend time on something like that, that's time that I can't spend on other things. So I think, it just comes down to setting priorities of where we need to invest the time and the resources. And I think we just ran out of resources to host an event like that. But it was a great event. I think our peak, we had 1,200 people or so attend. So fairly good attendance, and that varied from year to year. But I'd be happy to share more information about our experience with Open Streets events. We started out calling it Cycling Sunday, and then we changed it to Walk and Roll Winston-Salem. So I could certainly share information about our experience with that, and maybe what it would take to begin something like that again.
Hey Matt.
Yeah.
Kind of following up on the point that Cynthia brought up, is that can we partner with other groups in terms of resources to help host that? I was thinking like maybe Winston-Salem that might be a group that could help out, something like that. Yeah, so we've talked to them about it, and okay. I think, again, it comes down to the resources. Planning an event like that is a huge undertaking. No, I understand that. And I think, so that's typically how it works in other communities. So there are always outside organizations outside the city that are mainly responsible for organizing and hosting those events. So if it's going to be successful, that is the model, that there's usually a nonprofit or something with resources to host that. But yeah, I think that's what it would take to make it successful here again.
I'm looking at the clock, and somehow we've already reached 10 again, in the middle of great discussion. Trying to think how to best organize our time for the next meeting, but I think maybe we just dive in with continuing this discussion and trying to bubble up what our priorities are going to look like. So again, reviewing that bicycle master plan, the pedestrian master plan, maybe sharing or resharing some of these links looking at the application deadline and just see where we can best harness our energies to move some of these things forward. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? I hate to cut this off, but we all probably have other things we need to get to as well.
I did want to ask a quick question about the pedestrian master plan. As I recall, there was a public review period of the, I guess, final draft that I thought was ongoing, and I hadn't seen anything recently about it.
Yeah, Greg.
I was thinking there was a public review time frame, and it's probably coming to an end if it's not close to that.
It's actually, we're about to begin that. So we have a draft plan from the consultant, and we submitted some staff comments to them, and they're revising. And so within the next week or so, we should have an announcement that draft plan is posted on the project website. So I will make sure to send out a notification to this group when that draft plan is posted, and then we want feedback, definitely. So I could use everyone's help in not only reviewing it and the recommendations within it, but then sharing that link to the draft with as wide of an audience as we can, so we can get some good feedback. So, yeah, Greg, good question. We're just about to start that.
Yeah.
Great. I'd been wondering about that too. Been kind of quiet from Alta. Anything else before we close out? Well, agree. Okay with that plan to dive in on deeper discussion in, gosh, March.
Right.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you all very much. I left this last meeting just super excited about the energy and level of engagement, and really looking forward to getting to work with you all. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, everyone.